First it was Bamako, now it is Niamey. Another Sahel capital has come under attack, and for the second time in less than 5 months, Niger's main international airport has become a battlefield. Explosions and gunfire echoed across Niamey before dawn on Thursday, as gunmen launched a major assault on Diori Hamani International Airport and a neighboring military facility. Now, 35 people were killed. Authorities say that 11 soldiers and 2 civilians died, 22 attackers were killed, and 4 people were wounded. And about 20 suspects were arrested. Al-Qaeda's Sahel branch, JNIM, has claimed responsibility, saying it carried out a suicide attack on the airport and an adjacent military base.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa. Sahel is under attack. Niger accuses France of the airport massacre. South Africa's xenophobia crisis continues. And we will talk about Kenya's agreement with the United States. Before we get into today's stories, we like to start with introductions. We've been gone for a little while, and there may be some of you who are new to watching this live stream, so we will introduce ourselves before we get into today's stories. I'll turn it over to my co-host to do her introduction. I'll do my own after. You're on mute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo. Very, very happy to be back. I've been on the Joe wave. I also took a trip to the continent. Nigeria to be specific, and a time was had, but definitely very happy to be back. Hi, Joe.
Welcome back. And yeah, I was about 2 weeks before you, right? You went to Nigeria about 2 weeks after I came back from Ghana.
But you're always gone today.
I am. I take about a month every 4 months or so on average. Yes, I'm Joe Hataga. For those who don't know, I'm the founder of Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. We also do these live streams where we could talk about the things that are happening on the ground so you understand the continent and the places that you might be thinking about moving, visiting, and investing in. So back to today's stories. As we mentioned, the headline story of today is the Sahel is under attack constantly, and there was an attack at the airport in Niamey, Niger. Specifically, as mentioned in that first part of that video, over 30 people were unalived. There was a jihadist group that took responsibility for it. However, the leadership in Niger has definitely blamed France for this. Many reasons for that, and we'll play a little bit more of this video. But we just want to make sure you guys are all aware. When we talk about the Sahel, I think most people think of just Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore. And although many attempts have been made on his life, many coup attempts have also been made, over 30, he is not the only one. And in fact, Niger and Mali have had different attacks, massive attacks in the recent months. And so we wanted to make sure that we're covering this so you guys are all aware that it's not just one country. It's a federation of these 3 countries. And they're all being under attack for basically the same reasons by similar groups. So with that, I'll get back more into this video to give more context about what happened. And I'll just mention that Niger's military government accused what they call armed mercenaries under the funding of Emmanuel Macron's France of backing the attack. An allegation Paris, of course, has repeatedly denied. The latest violence raises fresh questions over security in the Sahel. Now, to be clear, the people of the Sahel wanted this military leadership because of these attacks having happened before and Western soldiers being in country and not stopping them previously. So, you know, over the last few years, the leadership that has been in place have had many wins and seem to have been really being able to slow down the attacks. But it seems that over the last month and a half, 2 months, there have been some major attacks and some major funding has assisted in these attacks. So we'll play some more of this video and then we'll have some more commentary on the other line. or on the other side, and then we'll have another video for you from the rest of the Sahel and how they're responding to this.
In an official address broadcast by the state television, the government says that security forces foiled the attack on the airport. The statement also accused what it called armed mercenaries under the funding of Emmanuel Macron's France of attempting to breach the airport terminal.
On the morning of Thursday, June 18th, 2026, at around 6 a.m., armed mercenaries under the funding of Emmanuel Macron's France, some of them equipped with explosive belts and traveling in urban transport vehicles, including taxis, attempted an incursion into the terminal of Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey.
The swift response of the defense and security forces made it possible to neutralize the assailants before they reached the terminal building.
The military government later reportedly displayed a large cache of weapons, including RPG-7 launchers, AK-47 rifles, grenades, and explosives, as well as thousands of rounds of ammunition.
The Ministry of Defense extends its warm congratulations to the defense and security forces for their courage and selflessness.
All right, we will leave it there just in the interest of time. Gloria, your thoughts on what's happening in the Sahel and the response from the leadership of Niger, specifically laying the blame at the feet of Emmanuel Macron and financing coming from France.
And yeah, and I've said this repeatedly, that based on what we've seen throughout history, we can understand why certain countries in Africa, certain citizens of Africa would have, trust issues when it comes to a country like France, because throughout history, France has barely done anything that actually is not just about France. France has barely done anything that is largely for, in the interest of Africans. And these accusations have actually been coming up throughout the Sahel for years now. Since the revolutions in these countries happened, we have had repeated, I wouldn't even call them allegations, I'd say accusations of, accusations that have been thrown at France regarding suspected or, obviously they have their intelligence, statistics that are showing that France is indeed interfering in the Sahel. And yes, France has repeatedly denied these reports, but what I'm expecting to see from France, we need some rebuttals. We need evidence that you truly have nothing to do with these accusations. But on the contrary, you're spending so much energy just trying to go to Anglophone countries throughout the continent. But I would prefer to see more energy being given towards, basically you have to beat the allegations, but it's looking like France is not beating the allegations at this point. So I guess the more important point is the targets that are being aimed at the Sahel, regardless of whether or not you believe these accusations, those targets really need to be taken seriously, because lives are being lost daily. And it's clearly looking like a region of Africa that has chosen sovereignty over the same, things that we keep fighting against, things that have to do with our sovereignty, things that affect the resources, our resources being extracted to the West and things like that. But it feels like this is a price that they're having to pay, and it's just really unfortunate. But shout out to the governments, I would say. It's a really bold step to just come out and put this info. And after a while, it's like, if they keep saying this thing so confidently, then something definitely is there. But yeah, I guess we'll keep our eyes on it. But France, it's looking like you're not beating the allegations anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that. I think one of the things that we have seen with these attacks is these are groups who had been largely unorganized and had very sporadic and unsuccessful attempts over the last couple of years. And what's interesting is that I'm finding that in the last month and a half, there's been a lot more organization. And in multiple countries, right? There was just an attack in Mali just a couple of weeks back that we reported on. That one was huge, 15,000 troops in that country. And then you have an attack like this on a major airport. That leads you to believe that there's a larger funding source and a larger coordination, just by watching it, without throwing any accusations and blame on any one particular group. That is enough to make you think that. And, you know, when you have those kinds of attacks in coordination, it generally comes from training, intelligence, finances, from an outside resources that has the ability to do so. And what we do know about the West in previous years, as you mentioned, pick a country, in this case, let's say France, they have been very much involved in proxy style attacks. So it wouldn't be French troops directly, it will be people on the ground who are in opposition, who have been given the funding, the intelligence, and the weaponry to do these kind of attacks. And so with that history, as you mentioned, and with the opposition to the leadership by the folks that we just mentioned, it's not hard to believe that there's a possibility that they have been involved. To Gloria's earlier point, you know, we don't have any evidence at this point that we can share, but we are just reporting what we are seeing coming out of the region. They feel that they have enough evidence to say so. And so we are reporting what they're saying. So we will keep a close eye on this. As more evidence comes in, as more information comes in, we will absolutely be sure to share those details with you all. Again, we're here to share what's happening on the continent and for you to make your own decisions about what you think is happening. So with that, the Sahel Alliance vows unity, and they're rejecting what we're calling intimidation after this Niger airport attack. So the Alliance of Sahelian States, comprising of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, has vowed it will not be intimidated. In a show of unity, the foreign ministers from 3 military-led governments reaffirmed their commitment to their sovereignty project, insisting that they will press ahead despite rising insecurity. Authorities in Niger, as we mentioned, blame foreign-backed networks for that attack and attempts to destabilize the region, an accusation that's strongly denied, of course, by the external actors. But the attack, which left multiple security personnel unalived and dozens of suspected attackers also unalived or arrested, has intensified political tensions. And the bloc argues the violence fits under a wider pattern of interference aimed at undermining its political transition and their security ambitions. So I do want to play this video from First Post Africa, where they dive a little bit deeper into this response and how they feel they're going to counteract what has been happening the last couple of months.
The Alliance of Sahel States says it will not be intimidated days after the attack on Niger's main international airport. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are vowing to press ahead with their sovereignty project as they accuse foreign-backed networks of trying to destabilize the Sahel. The latest show of unity came in Mali's capital, Bamako. Foreign ministers from the 3 military-led Sahel countries met to review the second-year roadmap of the Alliance of Sahel States. Their message to the West: the Confederation would not be deterred.
The ministers denounced the terrorist and destabilization actions targeting the 3 confederated states. They particularly condemned the recent maneuvers of terrorists and their foreign state sponsors aimed at thwarting the Confederation's progress toward preserving sovereignty and achieving shared prosperity.
And the meeting took place just days after gunmen attacked Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey. Authorities said 13 people were killed, including 11 members of the security forces. 22 attackers were also killed, with roughly 20 others arrested. While Al-Qaeda's Sahel branch, JNIM, claimed responsibility, Niger's authorities pointed the finger elsewhere. The military government accused what it called mercenaries funded by Emmanuel Macron's France of carrying out this attack. France has not officially responded to the allegation. But for Niger's leaders, the attack has only strengthened their determination.
Vous le savez, le Niger vient à son tour.
As you know, Niger has, in turn, been the target of a terrorist attack attempt aimed at Niamey Airport. These repeated attempts at destabilization, attributed to externally supported networks, only strengthen our shared determination to face all challenges imposed upon us.
All right, we will leave it there for now. Your thoughts, Gloria, on the continued support, the forging ahead, and the determination by the Confederation to keep going amidst these major attacks. And I say attacks because it's been happening over the last couple of months, the major attacks that have been happening.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Kimmy Phoenix 2336. It is horrific news. It's horrific in that, you know, at the end of the day, this region, you had the entire world, not just Africans in Africa, but you had Africans and people of African descent throughout the world standing in solidarity behind them. In other words, yeah, elections may not have been held, but, you know, and this is why we call them revolutions, not coups, as they, you know, Western media and governments in the West would like to label them. But these are countries, these are leaders who people have rallied around because at the end of the day, they represent what sovereignty for Africa should look like. And the sovereignty is obviously being threatened by these insecurities that are happening. There's such a horrible, horrible distraction, as you said, horrific, just so distracting to, you know, if you're trying to be sovereign and you're having insecurity, because at the end of the day, that has to be top up there when you're talking about the distractions that could get in the way of them attaining that true sovereignty. But I do love the determination, and that is the mindset we all should have, because, you know, when it comes to revolution, it's actually ongoing. There are forces that have been set in the past that you're going to have to counter, and the first thing is that determination. You know, at the end of the day, you're not budging. You know the goal, and you're going to stand by your country's sovereignty to the best of your ability. So I say, yay Niger, yay Sahel.
Absolutely. And, you know, look, we've seen this throughout history, right? Leaders who have taken over through force, and the people of the country have supported it. And as you mentioned, it's a revolution when the country supports it. It's a coup when it's just a couple of people who are doing it and the people don't support it. In this case, each of the three countries have supported it from the beginning and continue to support it. And in fact, they support each other. And they're some of the most knowledgeable people about their own histories, the countries associated with them's history, and the history of the continent in general. They're aware of, you know, Thomas Sankara and what happened to him. They're even aware of what happened to Patrice Lumumba. And these conversations that are had on the ground, and I remember African Stream and now, you know, Sovereign Media and others, they talk to people on the ground, and you'll hear how aware they are of what's happening between within the region, and how supportive they are of the leadership. Where I think the problem is the people who previously were benefiting from the country's natural resources independently, but the countries weren't. These were people that were formerly in positions of political power, who basically they were just trading political party to political party, just taking terms, pillaging the resources of the country, selling it for cheap to other countries, and then keeping the profits for their own personal gain. all the countries on the continent of Africa have this issue, almost all. And all of the people are fed up. Not everyone has a group who have this kind of bravery and know-how and skill to have this kind of a revolution. And many are afraid, to be honest, and understandably so, because of what we're seeing today, these kinds of attacks. You know, what we saw these attacks under the previous governments. They started to slow down a bit once these folks took to power and basically stepped in and started using military force in a way that the previous militaries under the previous governments were unwilling to do. Let's just say unwilling. Who knows what the reasons are? I don't want to start giving reasons for it. But over time, it seems that with more funding, with more training, with more intelligence, these jihadist groups have now become more emboldened and are starting to attack again. In my opinion, and it's always been my opinion, that the people should decide what they want. And the people have decided what they want. I think the problem is the people who used to make money off of it have also decided what they want. And they're lobbying foreign governments to do something about it. This is not exclusive to Africa. This happened in Cuba. The wealthy Cubans who ended up in Florida, who've been lobbying the American government to remove the regime in Cuba today. It's happened in Iran. The Persians who came to Los Angeles and Florida and New York and all these places in the United States also have lobbied the United States government to do what they've recently done in Iran. It's same thing is happening in France, right? Or Ivory Coast. The former leadership go to Ivory Coast, go to France, and they're lobbying those governments to do the same. I think that is why people are very skeptical that these jihadist groups are operating alone, right? With that kind of information, with that kind of history, you know, there's a reason why people have been blaming the West for these kinds of attacks. Not too many people are aware of what happens after this leadership comes to power in a revolution and all of the conversations that happen in these new countries where the former leadership flee to. The lobbying that happens, the money that's paid for campaigns, the continued communication and assistance given to rebel groups on the ground in each of these countries. I just named a couple of examples, but there are many examples around the world where this happens. And that's all public knowledge, what I just explained to you just now. I mean, that is not all, that's not speculation. That is public knowledge. And so we have to understand that this will continue to happen. This is not going away. The efforts are going to continue to intensify. And so we just need to continue to support in whatever ways we can, if we are in support of what is happening in the Sahel, because it's not going to go away and it's going to continue to get worse. And so we're just hoping that they're able to build their military up enough to sustain, and also, of course, you know, eventually transition to, you know, a government that is one that will work in, you know, in perpetuity. Until then, we will continue to keep you guys posted on what's happening. But, you know, this is something that I think is really important for us to be aware of, because I don't know if everybody's really aware of all the different things that go on after a revolution happens, right? And why you would see so many of these kinds of attacks. And the reason why, I guess the other thing that I'll mention here is why that it becomes so easy to lay the blame at specific countries like they have, is because those countries had been getting these minerals for reduced pricing for so long, right? They've been forced to use a certain currency that nobody else uses. That, I mean, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, their resources, we're talking uranium, we're talking cobalt, we're talking gold, we're talking oil, right? All of these resources that have been extracted from the ground, sold for very cheap. Now, the individuals in those countries were making a lot of money themselves. Like, they were becoming personally wealthy but in terms of the cost of purchasing those materials, they were not at market rate and they were cheaper than usual. So France was able to get these materials for very, very cheap and continue to electrify their country, right? Something like 70% of the electricity that comes into that country is extracted from minerals that come from the continent of Africa. So if that is the case, they're incentivized to go back to the way things were. If you noticed, France never really did too many deals with the Anglophone countries. They didn't have to previously. They're starting to do more deals with the Anglophone countries now, but these deals take time. There's not as much mineral richness in some of these places that they're doing these deals with. And so you can see why people would lay the blame at their feet. I'm just saying what you can see. I'm not laying any blame myself, but I'm just trying to put it all out there for those of you who are watching to understand why people blame them. And there's other intelligence that we don't have, right? That they have that leads them to make these claims. So there's a couple of comments here. No one should be able to individually own resources from the earth. Agreed. Agreed. And the issue was that, you know what, you have a lot on the continent, and Gloria and I have these conversations separately. We've seen this across the continent, we'll say, in different countries, no specific countries being called out, where we'll see leadership fight their whole life to become leadership because their goal is to become a part of the political class so they can become wealthy. Not to change the trajectory of their country, but to become independently wealthy. And the political parties that are in place don't allow for someone to be a revolutionary and come in and say, corruption has to be gone, and we have to focus on giving the money to the people because this comes out of the ground that they live on. You know, these people are like, I fought my whole life to get in this position. I'm not going to allow you to come in and try to renegotiate these deals and redistribute the wealth back to the country because I've wanted to become independently wealthy my whole life. That is why I'm in this position. And this is what we are seeing. So pick a political party, pick a country. And there's an ingrained culture of this corruption because they're like, well, the previous government and the previous administration had it. Now it's my turn. You know, there's even been people who have said in their campaigns, it's my turn. You may have heard that before as a campaign slogan, for example. So it is going to be hard for any democratically elected leader across the continent to do something like this. This is why we see the most radical change happening coming through these revolutionaries. That was a long response, but I just thought it was important to communicate all of that for those who are watching. There's a statement here about Ghana. I can't read it out loud, but Jada, I just wanted to acknowledge that you made that statement. So really quickly, we want to move to some of the rest of the stories. So, you know, the World Cup is happening right now. You know, many of the viewers are in the United States. I know that the World Cup and soccer is not that big of a deal. Let me try to put it into perspective for those who are not international football watchers and who are not soccer players, right? As someone who's lived on the continent, who's traveled around even parts of Europe and even in Asia, in the United States, you have basketball courts in every major city. You go to suburbs and you see a basketball hoop on a garage, or somebody puts up a pole and has a basketball hoop. You have kids that play like flag football and football, American football. Those are the sports that are played most by kids growing up. And there's like little makeshift courts and fields made in every major neighborhood, suburb, and urban area across the United States. You go to anywhere else in the world and there's soccer pitches everywhere. In the same way there are people running around playing football and basketball in the US, everywhere else is soccer. Soccer by far is way bigger than any US sport, not even close. And the World Cup is just like the Olympics. if you think about the Olympics, there are many sports that people don't watch, but it's just about country pride. It is like it is a show of force for your country. It is a way to have pride for your country. You know, when you watch the Olympics, it's a similar thing, depending on where you're from and what events that you watch. The World Cup is exactly the same way. And because there's so many different kinds of conversations that happen about Africa and the Africa Cup of Nations not being at the level of the European Cup, or the African teams not at the level of Europe. However, when you watch the European teams play, they're mostly full of Africans, right? That is the conversation. So there's a lot of pride associated with it. So when, you know, Cape Verde is able to keep another team from scoring and the score is 0-0, they may not have won that game, but just by stopping them from scoring, it's a win, right? And you'll find that there are these smaller countries that really get a sense of pride from being able to stop one of these other powerhouse countries from advancing, or at the very least beating them handedly. Because the expectations going into many of these matches is that these small African countries are going to lose. And one of the other things that we have noticed is that there are many African nationals that do not play for their respective countries. They end up playing for the country that has adopted them, that they're playing in their leagues in Europe or elsewhere. And so those are kind of the underpinnings, and that's the background of the World Cup. It happens every 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. The general story of the World Cup, the biggest story of the World Cup really is Lionel Messi, who has scored in 3 different World Cups. He scored in his first 2 games, I think 5 goals in the first 2 games of the World Cup. He is known as the GOAT, right? This is the greatest of all time, GOAT. That's what that stands for those who are not aware. And there's also this question of, is Ronaldo the GOAT? And could he have? And one of the things that Ronaldo has not done yet is won a World Cup. So that's the stories that make the sport, right? So if you don't watch the broadcast, you don't hear the stories, you don't get sucked into it, it just is another sporting event that you don't care about. Now, to why this pertains to Africa. This year, the World Cup has been in North America, and namely some parts of the United States. And so it has been named as the most inclusive tournament ever. But for many supporters of Senegal and across Africa, the experience has actually been very different. Fans, journalists, and even officials have faced visa hurdles and travel restrictions, which has really been raising the question over access to the tournament that's hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Obviously, Senegalese supporters say they've been shut out, while the movie story from obviously Cape Verde highlighted the human costs of the visa battle. So as criticism grows, many are asking whether football's biggest stage is truly open to everyone or only to those who have the right passport. So with that, I will play this video from First Post Africa, and we will have some more commentary on the other side.
FIFA calls this the biggest World Cup in history, the most inclusive, the most global. But across Africa, many supporters are saying that they are watching a very different tournament, one where money, passports, and politics matter more than the passion for sport.
I went to the World Cups in Russia and Qatar. This is the first time I have been denied an entry visa to a country because of US restrictions. I see that sports have become a rich person's game. If you look at what is happening with this World Cup, you realize that football has become a business, and there is too much stigmatization.
Now, Paco Senegal, the university-recognized mascot of the Senegalese national team, has expressed immense frustration after being barred from entering North America, despite his extensive history of attending previous global tournaments. And the anger is growing in Senegal. In Dakar, hundreds of supporters have been forced to gather at local screening venues to watch their team from thousands of kilometers away. Many say that they were denied visas, and they insist they travel to support their team, not to stay abroad.
This is the first time Senegal is playing in a World Cup without its supporters present. We successfully did the 2002 edition in Korea, Japan, the 2018 in Russia, and the 2022 edition in Qatar without any issues. We go there to support our team, and then we come back. We are responsible people, and we all have our jobs here in Senegal. We are not going there to stay.
The problem goes far beyond fans. Senegalese journalists have also been caught in a visa maze. Most received single entry visas, which means leaving the United States to cover Senegal's match in Canada could cost them access to the rest of the tournament.
There's a lot there. I think it's really important to mention this, the single access, right? The single entry visa. The restrictions to that point, right? There are games being played in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Canada, United States, and Mexico. And so if you come to the US for the first game, you have to go to Canada for another game. You have to go to Mexico for another game. You cannot, as a journalist, go back and forth between the countries or back into the United States because it's single entry visa. This is the reason why many people were against this happening in the United States, because a big part of the World Cup, just like the Olympics, is that people from the country that's participating come to watch their teams play. It's great for tourism for that country, but a country like the United States, with the current immigration practices that it has, does not allow for the fans to be able to come and support their teams. And that is really an unfortunate circumstance. But your thoughts, Gloria, on this, considering the lockout for so many foreign nationals who wanted to support their countries?
Yeah, and the irony for me that just jumps out is how you have Africans who support Trump's government. You know, we've talked about this repeatedly. I mean, the support, and it's actually still quite strong. And, you know, the reason some people have spoken against Trump's government is because of things like this, because we don't realize how these things would affect us, not even just on an individual level, but continentally. The US government repeatedly assured FIFA, the US government assured the world that after it won its bid, it assured the world that everyone would be welcome. Trump even sent letters to FIFA stating he was confident that athletes, officials, fans from countries all around the world would actually be able to come into the United States without discrimination. And everything that we've seen play right before the tournament and immediately after the tournament have told a completely different story, with African people being the most targeted. And of course, the case of Omar Abdul Kadir Artan of Somalia stands out. This was a man who was named referee of the year by the Confederation of African Football in 2025. He had made history by becoming the first person from Somalia to take charge of a continental final. He had been selected as one of FIFA's 52 World Cup referees, and he was set to actually become the first Somali ever to officiate at a World Cup. So there was history being made. This was a man who had actually overcome odds. I mean, you're talking about navigating around explosions in Somalia just for him to be able to train at the stadium. So there was a lot of sentiment. There was a lot of pride attached to his story. And in spite of him holding a valid US visa, in spite of him holding a diplomatic passport that was issued with the assistance of the Somali embassy in Nairobi, he arrives at the Miami International Airport and is detained for approximately 11 hours. He's shown into a holding cell, and then he's placed on a return flight to Istanbul without ever being given a reason for his refusal. How do you explain a case like that? Something that was supposed to be a big source of joy and pride for the continent, he gets denied, and no evidence was ever cited. And you have FIFA not even being able to fight for this man and saying, "Oh, you can't control what the hosting country does." Are you serious? And then y'all issue him a peace prize. You issue Trump it. Are you serious? What is that anyway? The peace prize. But anyway, so it just tells you a lot at the end of the day, in the words of Michael Jackson, they don't really care about us. At the end of the day, that's why we do everything we can when we're talking about sovereignty for the continent. It's to prevent things like this, at the very least for our dignity. I mean, you have Somalia on the US travel ban. 5 African countries who that qualified for this tournament: Algeria, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Tunisia, and Cape Verde. All were subject to the visa bond program, which basically requires a 15,000 deposit before you can even be given entry. So it's not been a good look. It's been very unfair. And I'm very concerned. I've spoken a lot about the dignity of Africa. How we get treated affects how the world ultimately sees and treats us. And it's just really unfair that on a massive stage like this, countries that are truly qualified for, and even journalists were barred, even fans from all around the world who deeply were invested in this tournament, who deeply cared. And then you choose, you know what I mean? You bid to be a host country, and then you treat people of African descent that way. Meanwhile, you're very happy to open your doors for Afrikaners who you claim are victims in their countries, but this is how you treat Black Africans, or Africans, should I say. It's just really sad. But yeah, that's just the way it is, I guess, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, we are the ones who can fight for our own sovereignty and dignity.
Yeah, and to add to that, the embarrassment of the Senegalese football players, the Senegalese Football Federation, undergoing extensive security checks at the U.S. airport tarmac, that was supposed to be designed to expedite their travel. They're saying that that's not discriminatory treatment. But I don't know if you guys saw the viral videos, right, of them going through those extensive searches. Now, they were told that they were going to go through these extensive searches so that they can go through security a little faster. So, these are football players, right? This is the FIFA, blessed and agreed upon list of players and people. And this was required for them to be able to go through a normal or faster screening process through the airport, so they didn't have to go through another, maybe a different, more humiliating process, which is not required by other countries for entry when you're talking about these kinds of football players. In any case, I think that there's a couple of things that you said that I think really stand out. One, they don't care about us, right? And also, people treat you how you allow them to treat you. As long as Africans allow the West to treat us this way, we will continue to be treated this way, right? And I don't mean any kind of attack or anything like that. I just think it means having dignity, calling it out, and refusing that kind of treatment moving forward. That's what I mean. I think that I can tell you right now, there is no way Japan, China, Russia, South Korea even would allow for any of this, right? There's no chance. There's no chance. So I think that we just need to be more vocal as countries and as a continent to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Because it symbolizes the way they think about us, right? And so if that's how they think about us, then we don't need to participate, or we need to ensure that it doesn't happen in a place where this is going to happen moving forward, right? I think they should lobby the FIFA to ensure that whoever wins the bid would never treat any of those who are attending in this way. All right. Now, there is another story that had been brewing early on in the World Cup, and that's with Africans turning against South Africa amid the xenophobia tension. So I will say I personally witnessed this amongst all of the people I know on the continent, that every game that South Africa played in, the other team was who the other Africans rooted for. They rooted against South Africa in every single game that South Africa played in. I mean, I think there was a game against Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. Most of the people I talked about didn't even know where Mexico was on the map. They were just happy that Mexico was going to be beating South Africa. They were hoping for that. But let me read a little bit from what First Post Africa has said, and then we'll take you to the video that that they have for this. So in a traditional script of continental unity that has flipped at the FIFA World Cup as African footballer fans widely turned their backs on South Africa's national team. The backlash is fueled by a severe wave of anti-immigrant protests and reported xenophobic violence or Afrophobic violence in South Africa, driven by groups blaming undocumented migrants for the country's unemployment crisis. Nations like Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Mozambique have begun repatriating citizens over these security and safety concerns. So these political tensions have spilled directly into the Continental viewing centers, where fans are actively cheering against South Africa or boycotting their matches entirely. While some fans argue that football should remain a bridge rather than a barrier, the pressure has deeply impacted the squad. The South African Football Association has strongly denounced severe online harassment targeting players, while the captain admitted the team is hurting from being forcefully dragged into complex political conversations. So with that, we will play this video from the folks at First Post Africa, and we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
The FIFA World Cup is supposed to be a time of unity, especially for Africa. Traditionally, when one African nation plays on the world stage, the entire continent stands behind them. But this year, that traditional script has been completely flipped. South Africa's national football team, Bafana Bafana, is facing massive continental backlash. Across Africa, football fans are turning their backs on the team. This widespread anger is fueled by a recent wave of anti-immigration protests taking place in South Africa. These protests are driven by groups blaming undocumented migrants for South Africa's unemployment crisis. Several countries, including Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, and Mozambique, have been repatriating hundreds of their nationals over safety concerns and have lodged formal protests against reported attacks on their citizens. Xenophobic violence has reportedly killed several migrants. President Ramaphosa has condemned violence against immigrants, and at the same time, he has vowed to crack down on undocumented migrants staying in the country. This tension has spilled directly from the streets into football viewing centres and bars across the continent. In Lagos, Nigeria, one viewing centre reported a dramatic drop in turnout for South Africa's recent match against Czechia on the 18th of June.
The Morocco-Brazil game, we had over 80 persons that came to watch. The other day, Congo, Portugal, same thing. But for today, we have less than 2 persons or 3. So you cannot be treating us bad over there and want us to be calm or fold our hands and just watch. There must be a reaction. There must be a backlash. As you can see, people are now disinterested in South Africa and their football games and whatever that concerns them.
Meanwhile, in Kenya and Ghana, the atmosphere tells a similar story. Football fans were seen actively cheering for Czechia, celebrating every missed opportunity by the South African squad.
I was rooting for a win for Czech Republic, but it ends in draw, 1-1. So, I mean, we are going to go with this, with the draw. It's okay for now. But again, the against will go on to the final game. And I want to see South Africa going back to South Africa.
But while the anger is loud, it is not entirely unanimous. Some African fans argue that you cannot judge an entire country by the actions of a minority, reminding others that football should remain a bridge and not a barrier.
If a child offends you, you don't throw the child away. So we can't give South Africa up even if they are misbehaving. So they will always be family. That's why I'm still supporting South Africa.
Well, that's one way to look at it. So your thoughts, Gloria, on how people have responded to South Africa's team at the World Cup?
You know, every time I have like, every time we want to talk about SA, I'm just like, oh goodness, here we go again, because it just feels like a never-ending cycle. I personally wasn't invested in the conversation. I mean, I saw the videos, I saw the jokes that were made. I didn't have an opinion on Mexico versus South Africa or South Africa versus South Korea, which, by the way, South Africa did well. At least they won that one. So you know what I mean. But I think beyond the memes and the jokes and even some of the anger regarding South Africa's approach to the issues of immigration and people's support. Let's talk about Mexico specifically. People's support for Mexico in my entire history, and I don't know about you, Joe, I've never seen anything like this happen, ever. I've never seen, because one thing about Africans, they're going to rally around their own. Even if we have differences, we're going to unite and rally around our own. But I think beyond just looking at the jokes and looking at it as people poking fun or taunting South Africans, there's a message here. We're seeing a shift from the Africa that, and I know some South Africans don't like to hear this, but the Africans who rallied around South Africa in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s, during apartheid. And now we're seeing Africans distancing themselves from South Africa, even if it means supporting a country from a completely different continent, even if it means supporting people who do not even look like us. There's a message there. I mean, I'm sure deeply, at the end of the day, we know we're African at the core of it all, but there's a message there. You have the rest of the continent standing against this country because it's basically just an expression of displeasure. And the big point that I feel like no matter how we say it, it's very rarely received properly. The big point is that I understand and I have acknowledged that, yes, indeed, there are issues of immigration. There are things, the unemployment rate is high and people are frustrated. I understand all that. And what we're saying is we don't have an issue. I don't have an issue. And many Africans have also expressed this. We don't have an issue in you tackling that, in you holding your officials accountable. But what is actually upsetting to people is the direction in which this anger has been pointed. You're pointing it at Black migrants rather than at the structural failures of post-apartheid economic policy. These are the real issues. So you're not going to see me make a video or reshare a video where, I have no opinion on that because I think it's a very sensitive conversation. But at the end of the day, it's just so heartbreaking, honestly, to see where this whole thing has gone to. It's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough, right? Because the conversation I was having with folks is, unless you have seen any of those specific players agreeing with the rhetoric of Jacinta and some of those other folks who have been saying all of the things about the migrants, then they're not to blame for this, right? Now, also, if they haven't spoken out against it, that's also an issue, right? But, look, this is the consequence of what happens when people of your country start to act out. The United States at one point in time had a really good feeling about Americans when you would come. People were like, oh, you're from America, nice to meet you. I would travel around the world during a particular 8 years, let's say from 2008 to 2020, around that time. From 2008 to 2016, excuse me. During that time, there was always a warm welcoming for the United States because of who was in power and the rhetoric from who's been in power. I get a different response the last year or so, and for another 4 years prior to the last 4 years, because of who was in power, right? So that happens a lot, right? That is just how it works. And so it's unfortunate, but I would imagine if members of the South African team had been vocal about their disapproval of the rhetoric by Jacinta and others in South Africa, they probably would have gotten a different response. It's just how it is, right? This is how it works. Africans support Africans no matter what. I would tell you there were a bunch of people supporting Ghana who don't go to Ghana, don't really care about Ghana, but they were supporting Ghana because Ghana is in West Africa and they were still in the tournament, right? Yeah. I had friends who went to bars in Sierra Leone and in Nigeria to watch Ghana play. And so, yeah, we will support each other even if there are differences, because there's one thing to have a difference with a family member, but when somebody outside has a difference with that family member, it's different. But if that family member is kicking you out of their house, then you're not going to support them when they go somewhere. So, yeah, I mean, look, it is what it is. It is just a side effect of what's been happening in that country. And we do hope that they start to, direct that energy to who it should be directed towards, as opposed to focusing on other Africans, because in the end, they're all going to lose out. It's not going to be beneficial. And what you may end up having is the Democratic Alliance taking advantage of this and stepping in and becoming the major party in country if we're not careful. That's a conversation for another time. Those of you who know, but just look up who the Democratic Alliance is, the DA in South Africa. And that too has been slowly creeping in and kind of, saying that these other guys are bad. We're the good ones, right? And so just be careful, South Africa. You may end up in that position where you'll be even more unhappy than you have been because of who ends up being in place. Because I trust me, they are not there for you. Jacinta and friends, trust me. Okay. With that, there was, on that note, I will say there has been a, we are at time, we are over time. Sorry, we spent some extensive time on some of these original stories. But I will just get to one story, because we would be remiss if we did not communicate that Ramaphosa has finally spoken out. He is the president of South Africa. There's been a lot of questions about the leadership in country. If you remember, the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, who has been probably the most vocal and the most high-profile South African leader that has spoken out against the Afrophobia that has been happening in South Africa. He's actually gone viral on a few occasions talking about the fact that, like, okay, you guys go beat up a Nigerian shop owner, and then he leaves the country. Who's gonna hire the South Africans? What happens to that business? You guys just lose a business now, right? And so recently, though, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged citizens not to blame migrants for the country's economic and social challenges amid a surge of Afrophobic violence. Speaking during a Youth Day commemoration marking the 1976 Soweto uprising, Ramaphosa warned against scapegoating foreign nationals and called for practical solutions to unemployment, crime, and poor service delivery. So we will hear from First Post Africa and their reporting on this story, and then we'll have some commentary on the other.
We begin with South Africa, which is reeling under xenophobic violence. In the latest, President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged citizens not to blame migrants for the country's problems. He acknowledged the problem of illegal immigration in South Africa and added that the government is taking steps to resolve it.
There are some who blame the problems of the current government, of unemployment, crime, and poor service delivery on foreign nationals. Addressing these challenges does require practical solutions, not the scapegoating of vulnerable people.
The remarks were made on the 16th of June at the Youth Day ceremony that marks the 1976 Soweto uprising, which brought down apartheid. Ramaphosa also pointed out the country's youth unemployment issue. The South African president outlined the government's efforts to create jobs. He also urged the private sector to offer first-time opportunities to young applicants. South Africa's overall unemployment rate has stayed above 30% for 5 straight years, while the current youth unemployment stands at 42%. This is according to South African president. Now, despite the significant unemployment rate, South Africa has long attracted migrant workers from across the continent. These include both legal and illegal workers.
All right. So, Gloria, your thoughts on Ramaphosa making a statement?
Yeah, so I just want to quickly make a reference to legal and illegal, right? And you know, again, this is one of those things where no matter how we explain it, it's like that part of the message keeps getting missed. Nobody's endorsing illegal migrants in any country, not even abroad. You know, we can look at the reasons the countries have gotten to where they are, but nobody's endorsing. I'm not endorsing illegal migration in any way. But, you know, the March on March movement's own leader consistently denies that it's xenophobic, that it's Afrophobic, and they're saying they're basically advocating for immigration enforcement. I get all that. However, the behavior, you know, you say one thing, but the documented behavior, there's a huge contradiction there. And Ramaphosa, you know, we've even talked about it here on this show, the fact that the government has been largely quiet. But I will say, unfortunately, this might make him even more unpopular. You know, you made reference to the DA, the Democratic Alliance Party. This might, obviously, it's made Malema less popular, at least within South Africa, but on a Pan-African level, of course, people support him for his stance on this conversation around migration in South Africa. But, you know, speaking from a business point, because it's one thing to be concerned about how popular you get within the country, but how does that affect you continentally? South African companies are deeply embedded in African economies in ways that makes this very, you know, it's going to make it vulnerable. They're going to be in a vulnerable place structurally. You have MTN across more than 20 African countries. You have Standard Bank, you have First Rand, these ShopRite, you know, so these companies are also going to feel the brunt of it, and ultimately it does affect South Africa. But and then you also have South Africa's presence. You know, if it's going to claim to be Africa's champion at the G20, at the AU, BRICS, the ICJ, the question is always going to be, what are you doing to protect your citizens or African citizens in your country? So I do commend Ramaphosa for shouting out, or at least for calling it out. Some might say it's a little too late, but at least he's spoken out on it, even though it's not going to be necessarily popular among the people of South Africa. But I think on a continental level, that acknowledgement was important. However, we have had these acknowledgements. The question now is, what will your government do? Number one, to curb the issues of immigration that's reached a point where African migrants are being targeted. And what will you also do? What are the measures that are being put in place for people who do break this law and keep attacking migrants, be they legal or illegal? Because we've seen videos that show that even legal migrants are being targeted.
100%. And I'll add that one thing that has not been discussed enough is that it is election season in South Africa right now for different parliamentary roles. And one of the things that I've been reading and seeing from different news reports is that there are parliamentarians that have been feeding into this Afrophobia and actually fueling the fire. In the same way in the United States, you might notice that right-leaning political figures might do the same thing about Mexican migrants and saying that, you know, Al-Qaeda is coming through Mexico into America and they're bringing, you know, stuff across the border, blah, 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 all those things. These are the same kinds of things that we are hearing from some of these parliamentarians in South Africa. And so what I think is also important for Ramaphosa to do is to speak to those folks as well, and to be very clear that they should not be fueling the fire. I understand that people want to win a political campaign. And for some people, they believe that the ends justify the means. However I can get into this position, I will. If that means saying we're going to stop other Africans from coming here, or these Africans are taking your jobs, or whatever they're going to say, they feel that that is their path to getting into that role. To your point, that is very detrimental on so many different levels. And it's wrong, right? It's just wrong. That's and wrong, I mean, morally wrong, and also wrong in terms of the reason for the unemployment. Youth unemployment being at over 40% is not because of migrants, illegal or legal. That has a lot to do with the government that is in place, and not just the main government, but also the DA and others. And it's not just that too, it's policy that is in place. So again, as we mentioned before, Kenya got it right? Kenya's protesting specific government policies, right? When a bill gets passed, the Kenyans don't like it. they go to the streets and they communicate it. It's that simple. What happens in South Africa is not that. What we have is a loud minority, because it's not all people in the country, but it's a loud minority that is blaming, unfortunately, the migrants for this issue, and it's not that. And there's been many videos of Jacinta, and I'm naming her specifically because she's kind of the face of the movement. She's a former radio personality. She's gone viral for so many of her videos where she'll go to shop owners and she'll say, hire these people. And the shop owners are like, what are their credentials? Are they actually even going to show up for work on Monday? You know, there's some serious questions. Because one thing we do know is that generally migrants are almost always willing to do the jobs and work a lot harder generally than those from the country of origin. You see that in many countries around the world. I've had these conversations in France, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Sierra Leone. I've had these conversations in the United States, in Canada. It's all the same kind of story. These folks are desperate and are looking for work to be able to send, to be able to take care of their families back home. And so many times they're willing to do work that most other people won't do. Right. How many people do you know want to be a bathroom attendant here in the United States? Right? I see a lot of Senegalese in the club bathrooms, who are working to save up money to do whatever they can to take care of their families. Or, I go to a work site where they're doing hard labor construction anywhere across the United States. And there are a lot of folks from south of the border working on those things. And it's not because they won't hire Americans. Part of it's because they can pay people south of the border less than what Americans would cost. And the other piece of it is, not as many people are willing to do that hard labor here in the United States. And so similarly, in South Africa, at least according to these videos from these shop owners, it's a similar circumstance. And so really there's some work to be done around educating those who are unaware and also changing those who are in power. I think they should really strongly consider looking at Julius Malema and the EFF around his policies and what he's proposing, and see if that more is in alignment with what you're looking for, as opposed to blaming other African migrants. Anything else you want to say on this story?
I think you've said it all.
Okay, so with that, here's a good point. Jade is saying, find out what NGO or Western entity she's getting paid by. It may not be an NGO or Western entity. There's a Democratic Alliance right inside that country, which I'm not blaming. I'm just saying there are people within that country that have the same interest. So it may not even have to be international. It might even be someone there locally. There's plenty of possibilities. And it may not even be Democratic Alliance. It may be someone else from somewhere else. I'm not going to name any other political parties, but there are many people who have an interest in having them, it's like the sleight of hand. Don't watch his hand, watch this one, right? Because this hand is doing something you can't watch this hand. So there may be somebody doing that exact same thing. And it could be any one of the local political parties. It could be other interests within the country. We don't know, but it may not even be Western. So with that, I know we are a bit over time. We haven't gotten a chance to get into the last story in depth, but maybe we could just talk about it from a high level. Ruto has given U.S. access to untapped mineral deposits worth $62 billion. Let me play actually a little bit of this video. I think it's worth it. We're a little bit over time, but let's play a little bit of this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Well, moving on now, and a high-stakes economic war is exploding across Africa, and Washington just made a massive power move. The United States has signed a preliminary deal to take control of one of the richest, most untouched mineral fields on the planet. The target is a site called Mlima Hill in Kenya. The rare earth and niobium deposits here are estimated to be worth over $62 billion. Kenyan President William Ruto announced the deal on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France last week.
We are finalizing an agreement with America on some of our rare earth and critical minerals. And we have agreed that the minerals will be processed in Kenya, as opposed to, what the other relationship. We've agreed with them on what is mutually beneficial between Kenya and the United States.
Now, this isn't just any business deal. This is open combat in a modern scramble for Africa. Right now, the world is desperate for what are known as rare earth minerals. You can't build smartphones, electric cars, or advanced military missiles without them. And for years, China has owned the market. They control the supply, which means they control the leverage. But now, the US is using its financial power to push back hard to break China's grip. At the same time, Russia has been expanding its footprint across Africa, like in Mali, in the Central African Republic, by offering military security to governments in exchange for direct access to resource-rich mining areas.
Thoughts on this deal? $62+ billion.
So America,
go ahead.
America doesn't find Africans worthy in certain regards. You don't find Black Africans worth. Let me stop saying Black Africans. You don't find indigenous Africans worthy of asylum, for instance. You don't find them worthy to be refugees in America. You don't find them worthy, some even worthy, many worthy to even come for the World Cup. But you find their mineral resources worthy to be tapped. And this is where our leaders should take accountability. I get the economic standpoint. Ruto has always said he's not looking left, right, he's looking forward. So he's going to partner with whoever the highest bidder at this point. You're giving America access. When we talk about the dignity of Africa, you throw everything away. You see how these people treat us. But when it comes to money, many of you don't even care. And that's why, and that's why when people say, "Oh, let the past go," no, we would love to let the past go, but the present is very much reminding us of the past. This is really sad. Africans are not worthy, but our resources, at the end of the day, like I said, they don't really care about us. What they really care about is everything under the earth. Thank you, African leaders. Thank you.
Yes, you said a lot there, and I agree. Look. At some point, we have to have more dignity, right? As a continent. You see how others are being treated, the visa bans, etc. They don't want our people, but they want our minerals.
Yes.
And again, the question is, who is benefiting from this? The example I just gave of rare earth minerals being sold by the few politicians to the West. They were independently becoming wealthy and the country is not benefiting. Let's ask the question in Kenya. Where is the money going to be going? Is it going to building schools? Is it going to infrastructure? Is it going to the people of Kenya? I don't think many people would take issue with the dealing of rare earth minerals if they knew that the majority of the revenue was going to improve the day-to-day lives of those living in the country. I think most people would be okay with it because at the end of the day, it's business, right? I think the issue is that what happens with that money. And I don't think anybody in Kenya at this point in time, based on many of the protests, thinks that money is coming back to them, right? And I don't know if people are watching also think that as well. So, I think it's really important for us to hold our leaders accountable that when they do deals like this, that they're communicating what a fair deal means, right? Fair, mutually beneficial. What does mutually beneficial mean? Does it mean beneficial to the cabinets or beneficial to the country, right? And what are the terms of that deal, mutually beneficial deal, right? What is the United States getting? What is Kenya getting? I think those questions are fair questions that people have and people are asking. But I don't know if we have the answer to that. And so, these are the reasons why these revolutions have happened in the Sahel, because these same kinds of deals had been happening, but more quietly though. I don't think everybody was aware. There weren't announcements like this where these things were happening. But these kinds of deals had been happening throughout, the history of, the country's independence. And so at some point, the people got fed up with it, and they said, we need to make some changes. And you see how Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have taken that funding and have worked on infrastructure projects, started to work on farming, doing factories, building schools, all of those things that they've been doing. The question is, what is going to happen with the finances that are going to be, or the revenue that's going to be generated by, the sale of these mineral resources to the United States? Okay, so we are over time. I want to thank everybody for joining. A very engaged group today, and a good number of folks joining across platforms. If you guys want to support, somebody did ask that earlier, so I sent a message on that. You can, reach out via Zelle, Cash App, PayPal, however you want to support. Also, too, not just that, you can also go to insights.authenticafrican.com, sign up for our newsletter, and then you can also join one of our collectives. There are different versions of the collective that you can join. So if you just go to insights.authenticafrican.com, you can actually just get some value. Instead of just donating, you'd also get some value there too. So again, insights.authenticafrican.com. Fill out that form there, and after you fill out that form, you'll be invited to join the collective. You can join the collective where we are sharing all of our resources, I mean me, and the resources that I've gotten from across the continent on, real estate developers, plumbers, Starlink installers. I know Starlink, but those kinds of things, right? If you have some questions about developers, agents, all the things that plumbers, people that I've used to in Sierra Leone, in Ghana, and then we're adding more countries as time goes on, taxi drivers, all different kinds of resources. I'm making those available through the collective. So if you just go to insights.authenticafrican.com and you sign up to get the newsletter, once you finish that sign up, the next page after that will be your invitation to join the collective. Feel free to join. Shout out to Jada. She was one of the first members to join the collective. She did the year-long membership, so we appreciate you for joining. And so, yeah, definitely. But if you want to support this way, you can support with what's on the screen as well, however you feel you'd like to support. Now, with that, I will say, make sure you follow us on all platforms. Follow Diaspora Station and the Gloria AO across all platforms. Follow Authentic African across all platforms. And we will see you guys again next Thursday. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.